The Red Ribbon, A Story of Hope. Not long ago, in a nearby land, a good king looked out over his kingdom. From high in the castle tower, he could see everything. Tall trees in the forest, beautiful gardens and farmlands, the crystal blue river, and all of the people who lived and worked in the village below. One would think with all of these beautiful things in sight, the king would be very happy, but he wasn't. Instead, the king was quite sad. All he could see when he looked out his window was a terrible sadness in his kingdom. Because the people in the village were afraid, the king worried, and the smile he once had turned into a big frown. The king knew if he didn't do something soon to stop the sadness, he and his kingdom might never be happy again. So the king sent royal messengers to find the wisest, most powerful people in all the land and invite them to the castle to help save the kingdom. He invited dukes and duchesses, princes and princesses, lords and scholars. And when they arrived, he gathered them all in a big room to tell them about the terrible sadness he could see from his window. "My friends," he said, "the kingdom has great forests with many trees for wood, yet I see people who have no houses. The crystal river is full of fish, and there are farms as far as the eye can see, yet I see many people who are hungry because they have no food. There are people from many nations with much to share, yet I see selfishness and fear. And the saddest thing of all," the king said as his frown grew even bigger, "though I listen as hard as I can hear no children laughing. I can see no children playing. They stay in their homes, afraid to come outside. My friends, I need your help. You are my last hope. If we don't stop the sadness, it will soon destroy the kingdom." The sounds of whispers filled the rooms as guests tried hard to think of ways to help the king. "Your Majesty," someone cried, "perhaps you should send a brave knight to conquer this terrible sadness." "Yes, yes," agreed everyone. "Surely a brave knight could save the kingdom." The king, sitting on his throne, just shook his head. "I have already tried that. I sent the mightiest knight in all of the land to conquer the sadness, but it was too strong. My brave knight was defeated." "I've got it," exclaimed another guest. "Perhaps the kingdom is under an evil spell, and a great wizard is needed to stop the sadness." Again, everyone agreed. "Yes, yes, surely a wizard could save the kingdom." Again, the king shook his head. "I'm sorry, my friends, but you see, I've tried that too. The sadness is not an evil spell. The wizard could not help me." The king could see that even the wise and powerful friends had no idea, and the frown on his face grew bigger than ever. Suddenly, from the back of the room, they heard a voice. "Your Majesty, I may know how to conquer the sadness." Everyone grew quiet, and all eyes looked to the back of the room as a man stepped forward from the shadows. They all stared as he made his way to the front. He seemed plain, ordinary man, dressed in plain, ordinary clothes. Over his shoulder he carried a curious leather sack. It was brown and exceedingly large, and when the man reached the throne, he politely knelt before the king, who asked, "Do I know you, sir? Are you a prince or a duke or a brave knight?" Before the man could answer, a guest shouted, "He's a magician! Look, he carries a bag of tricks!" The king inquired, "Is that true? Are you a magician? Do you have magic that can heal my kingdom?" The man smiled at the king. "Your Majesty, I am not a duke or a knight or a prince. I am certainly no magician. I am just a simple weaver. I make cloth in the village below." "A weaver?" marveled the king. Everyone started to whisper again. The king squinted as he studied the stranger. "How can you help me?" the king asked. The man stood and explained, "Though I am not a king or a prince or a magician, I know of a great power that can stop the sadness. Gather everyone in the kingdom and meet me at the castle gates as the sun rises. Do exactly as I say and the kingdom will be saved." A guest cried, "This man is just a weaver from the village. What power could he have that we do not already know about? After all, we are the wisest, most powerful people in all the land." "There!" another guest quickly pointed to the weaver's sack. "The magic power must be in that brown sack." The room quieted once again. The king leaned forward and peered at the sack and asked the weaver, "Is the power to defeat the sadness in the leather sack you carry?" The weaver thought for a moment, and then he slowly leaned towards the king until their noses nearly touched. "As I said before, Your Majesty, gather everyone in the kingdom. Meet me at sunrise, and you shall see." The king sat back in his throne and scratched his head. "This I have not tried," he thought. "The weaver's magic may be my only hope." Then he rose to his feet and commanded, "Send the royal messengers. We will meet at sunrise and do as the weaver says." Wasting no time, the messengers rode through the land, telling everyone about the weaver and his plan to save the kingdom. The next morning, the king woke early and hurried down from the tower. When he arrived at the gates, he could see a large crowd had gathered and everyone was excited about the weaver and his magic. Moments later, the weaver appeared, carrying his big brown sack. The crowd stepped aside as he made his way to the gates where the king waited. The king, feeling the need to say something official, cleared his throat and spoke, "Loyal subjects, I give you the weaver." Before he could say more, everyone started cheering. The king raised one hand to silence the crowd, and with the other he pointed to the big brown sack and asked, "Does this sack contain the magic that will stop the sadness and save my kingdom?" Before the weaver could answer, the crowd cheered yet again, and with that the king stepped back and commanded, "Let it begin!" By now, the children had wiggled their way to the front of the crowd and formed a circle around the weaver and his leather sack. With eyes wide, not making a sound, they watched the weaver kneel down and open his sack. Then he reached inside and gently pulled out a bright red ribbon. It was the most beautiful ribbon anyone had ever seen, and it looked as if it could stretch miles and miles. The weaver stood and held the ribbon high above his head. "In order for the magic to work," he said, "you must do exactly as I say. This ribbon must be taken through the village, down the streets, through the alleys, and across the fields. You must take it throughout the kingdom, from the giant mountains to the great blue sea. Remember this, the ribbon must never touch the ground. Now listen very closely, for this is the most important part. Everyone in the kingdom must share in this task. If anyone is left out, the magic will be broken and the sadness will return." Then the weaver took the end of the red ribbon and carefully placed it in the hands of a small boy standing at the front of the crowd. He told the boy to take the ribbon and lead the way throughout the kingdom. After the boy had taken a few steps into the crowd, the weaver shouted, "Stop!" The crowd gasped as the boy froze. Looking back over his shoulder, the boy could see that if he took one more step, the long ribbon would touch the ground. The crowd was silent. The weaver said nothing. The king was speechless. Then a tiny girl stepped out from the crowd and reached out her little hands, lifting the sagging red ribbon high above her head. Without a word, she and the young boy turned and carried the ribbon forward. Now everyone understood. One by one, the people of the kingdom stepped forward to take their share of the ribbon. The banker followed the carpenter, who followed the school teacher, who followed the blacksmith, and on they came to carry the bright red ribbon throughout the kingdom. Before long, hundreds of people were holding the ribbon. It stretched from one corner of the kingdom to the other. They held it high above their heads, just like the little girl, so that it would never touch the ground. The king looked at the people and the ribbon stretching far into the distance. He looked at the leather sack and then at the weaver. "So," he said, "when does the magic begin?" "It already has begun," the weaver replied, and with that he kindly took the king by the arm and led him along the great ribbon. Before long, they came to a young girl with the ribbon wrapped around her shoulders. She stood shivering in a thin and tattered dress. Next to her was a man in nice new clothes, who could not help but ask, "Where is your coat, young lady? It is much too cold to be without a coat." "I have no coat, sir," said the little girl. "No coat!" he exclaimed, waving his arms in the air. "Everyone should have a coat, and that includes you. You see, I am a tailor. I make clothes, and I especially love making coats. Why, I have dozens of coats in my shop. I have green ones and orange ones, large ones and small ones, and I'm quite sure that I have one just right for you. It would make me very happy to give you a coat to keep you warm." The little girl smiled. The king was amazed. It was the first time he had seen in the kingdom a smile in a very long time. Even his frown was growing smaller. "The magic is working," he thought. Then he turned to the weaver and said, "Please show me more." Next, they came to a very thin old man. Beside him, holding the ribbon, was a round lady wearing a white apron and a floppy white hat. "What is that growling?" the lady asked. "Excuse me, ma'am," said the old man. "That is my stomach. I hope it didn't frighten you." "I've never heard such a growl from a tummy," the lady said. "Have you had nothing to eat today?" "No," said the old man. "I've had no food for 2 days." Heavens, she cried. No food for 2 whole days? Why, I can't go more than 2 minutes without a little something to silence my tummy. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the village baker. If you come to my shop today, I will fill your belly with warm bread and the finest cakes and pies in the kingdom. Thank you, kind lady, but I have no money, the old man said. The baker thought for a moment. My friend, I have an idea, she said. I need someone to deliver my cakes and pies to the town people. If you will help me, I will pay you a fair wage. That way you can buy food and will never have to hear your tummy complain again. I'll do it, the old man said. Again, the king was amazed by what he heard. His frown almost vanished, and he asked to see more. Soon they came to a crystal river where 2 men from different nations, standing tall and proud, held their share of the ribbon. Neither man said a word. In fact, they were trying very hard not to notice each other at all. The men began to wonder how long they would have to stand there holding the ribbon. We may be side by side forever, each man thought. Yet I cannot let go of the ribbon. I will not be the one to break the magic. As time passed, the men realized their stubbornness was silly. If they were going to be together for a long time, it would be much easier to talk rather than ignore each other. Finally, the silence was broken. I have noticed you have beautiful gardens on your side of the river, said one man. You are quite a farmer. I would like to be able to grow vegetables like yours someday. Thank you, the farmer said. I see you have built yourself quite a barn. You must have cut the wood from all the tall trees that grow on your side of the river. You are quite a woodsman. I would like to have a barn like that someday. The 2 men thought for a moment, and then each man looked at the other. I have an idea, said the farmer. I will give you some of my vegetables and teach you how to grow a garden like mine, if you will show me how to build a barn like yours. Show you how to build a barn, exclaimed the woodsman. I can do better than that. Not only will I show you how, I will give you the wood in which to build it. The 2 men didn't ignore each other anymore. That very day, they built a bridge across the river so they could share with one another. The king was delighted with what he had seen. His frown was completely gone, and a big smile had taken its place. The weaver and the king made their way through the entire kingdom. By now, there was much celebration. People cheered, church bells rang, horns blew, and at long last the king could hear laughter of the children. The sadness was gone. The kingdom was saved. The king and the weaver returned to where it had all begun. Approaching the castle gates, they watched as the last person of the kingdom pulled the ribbon from the brown leather sack. Suddenly, the king began to panic. There was still more ribbon in the sack. It must not touch the ground, he thought. So he raced to catch it. Before he could reach the brown sack, the last few feet of the ribbon lifted out and fluttered in the breeze. Slowly, very slowly, the ribbon fell softly to the ground. The king dropped to his knees. His sad old frown returned. A tear puddled in his eye and rolled down his cheek. The last hope to stop the sadness and save the kingdom is gone. What on earth will I do now? The king stared at the ribbon lying on the ground. He noticed something wonderful. People were cheering, bells were ringing, horns were blowing, and children were laughing. Though the ribbon had touched the ground, the celebration had not stopped. The magic is still working, the king shouted as he jumped to his feet. My dear weaver, your red ribbon is more powerful and amazing than even you imagined. You must tell me how you made it. Where is the magic? Where does it come from? The weaver said nothing. He simply held out his hand and pointed towards the people. The king was puzzled. I don't understand, he said. Then he looked out at the faces of his people, and he listened to their voices. A big smile covered the king's face as he realized the magic was not in the weaver's ribbon. The true magic is in the hands and hearts of those who embrace it. And throughout the land, from the castle to the valley, from the crystal river to the big blue sea, one person turned to another, and another to another, with smiles on their faces and laughter in their voices. They sang and danced, knowing that the kingdom was saved, and that as long as their hearts were joined together, they could conquer all sadness and live peacefully ever after.